She had already been promised to another man, the Countess of Ashworth said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who had long since stopped caring whether the subject of conversation could hear her. But then the elder brother died, and suddenly the arrangement became inconvenient. The Duke of Ravenswood stood very still in the doorway of the Ashworth drawing-room, his tea growing cold in his hand, his face arranged into the careful blankness he had spent 32 years perfecting. He had arrived early. The Countess had not noticed. She expected the title to transfer with her, the Countess continued, speaking to Lady Pemberton, who was nodding with the enthusiastic vacancy of a woman who collected other people's misfortunes. As if the younger son were obligated to honor a contract made with his dead brother, as if he had any reason to want her now that the incentive had changed. "What will you do with her?" Lady Pemberton asked. "There is a position in Scotland, a companion to some elderly relation, quiet, appropriate." The Countess smoothed her glove with a small, satisfied gesture. "She has been here 4 years, eating my household's food and wearing my household's patience. It is time she became someone else's burden." The Duke set his teacup down on the hall table with a precision that made no sound. He had met Miss Eleanor Voss once, 3 years ago, at her betrothal celebration, a young woman with dark eyes and a very straight spine, who had stood beside the elder Ashworth brother with the careful composure of someone who had learned not to want too much from any given room. He remembered thinking she looked like a woman practicing the art of existing quietly. He remembered thinking it was a waste. He had not thought about her since. He thought about her now. When he stepped into the drawing-room, the Countess turned with the smooth alarm of the socially guilty, and Lady Pemberton went slightly pink. The Duke offered them both the particular smile he reserved for moments when he intended to be completely devastating. "Lady Ashworth," he said pleasantly, "I wonder if I might speak with Miss Voss before our meeting. I have a matter to discuss with her directly." The Countess's eyes narrowed. "Your Grace, Miss Voss is not my grandmother," the Duke said, his voice acquiring the gentle, immovable quality of a man who had never once in his life been told no and did not intend to start today, "has been asking after a companion, someone with good sense and genuine accomplishment. I had not thought to look so close to home." He let the pause breathe. "I would be grateful for an introduction." There was a silence, in which the Countess of Ashworth understood, with the precision of a woman who had spent 20 years navigating aristocratic power, that she had no graceful way to refuse. "Of course," she said, "I will have her sent in." Eleanor Voss was shown into the drawing-room 7 minutes later, and the Duke watched her cross the threshold with the expression of a man cataloguing something he had not expected to find. She wore a pale yellow dress that did nothing for her coloring. Washed out, deliberate, the choice of someone who had dressed her to disappear. And her dark hair was pulled back with a severity that served the same purpose. But her eyes, when they found him, were direct and entirely without performance. She curtsied. He bowed. The Countess murmured an introduction, and then, at the Duke's pleasant, pointed look, found a reason to step away. "Miss Voss," the Duke said, "I apologize for the abruptness. I will be direct with you, if you will allow it." "I would prefer it," she said. Her voice was even, careful, but not afraid. "My grandmother requires a companion. The position is genuine. She is a formidable woman, and the work is not simple. But it would bring you to Ravenswood Park, and it would remove you from this house." He watched her face. "I understand that may be of some value to you." Something moved in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but the particular stillness of someone who has learned to distrust good news. "Why?" she asked. He had not expected the directness. He found to his own mild surprise that he respected it enormously. "Because I arrived early," he said, "and I heard a conversation I was not meant to hear, and because I have a grandmother who genuinely needs the company, which makes this arrangement useful to everyone and charitable to no one, which means you need not feel obligated to be grateful." She looked at him for a long moment. He had the sense she was measuring something, not his wealth or his title, but something more essential, his sincerity, perhaps, whether he meant what he said. "When would I leave?" she said. "Tomorrow," he said, "if you are willing." She was. The carriage ride to Ravenswood Park took most of a day, and they spent the first hour in the particular silence of two people who are strangers and know it. Eleanor watched the countryside unspool through the window, bare hedgerows, gray November sky, fields that had given up their color for the season, and tried to make sense of the fact that she was sitting across from a duke who had, for reasons she did not entirely understand, just removed her from a household that had spent 4 years making her invisible. "You don't have to pretend to sleep," the Duke said, without looking up from his correspondence. "I wasn't pretending," she said. "You were watching the window with the expression of someone composing a letter in their head." She turned to look at him. He was still reading, or appearing to. His profile was severe, strong jaw, dark brows, the kind of face that looked like it had been designed for portraits and had never quite adjusted to ordinary life. Handsome, in the way of things that were also somewhat alarming. "I was thinking," she said, "that I don't know what I'm walking into." He set the paper down then and looked at her with the same quality of attention she had noticed in the drawing room, direct, unhurried, as if she were worth the trouble of his full focus. It was, she discovered, slightly unnerving. "My grandmother is 81, sharp as a blade, and deeply suspicious of anyone who flatters her," he said. "She will like you, I think. She has no patience for women who make themselves small." Eleanor said nothing. Outside, the hedgerows blurred past. "The house is large," he continued, "and you will have your own rooms and your own time. No one will ask you to be invisible." A pause. "That is not a life I intend to offer." She looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite name. Not pity, which she had braced for. Something more like recognition. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I know what I heard this morning, and I know what 4 years in that house looks like on a person." His voice was quiet, even. "You deserve better than Scotland." She turned back to the window. Her throat felt strange. She would not cry in a duke's carriage on the first day of whatever this was. "Thank you," she said very quietly to the glass. He did not answer, but she heard the soft sound of him returning to his correspondence, and something about the normalcy of it. The ordinary, unhurried gesture of a man who had said what he meant and did not require her to perform gratitude, made her feel, for the first time in 4 years, that she might be able to breathe. Ravenswood Park was enormous. Eleanor stood in the entrance hall and tried not to show it on her face, but the marble floors and the vaulted ceiling and the portraits of stern ancestors stretching back centuries had a way of making a person feel very small and very recent. "It gets less intimidating," said a voice to her left. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenswood was smaller than Eleanor had imagined, compact, bright-eyed, dressed in deep burgundy that made her look like a woman who had decided long ago that she would be vivid or nothing. She was studying Eleanor with an expression that was simultaneously warm and entirely without mercy. "Does it?" Eleanor said. No, the dowager admitted, but you get bolder, which amounts to the same thing. She took Eleanor's hands in both of hers and held them with a firmness that was nothing like the limp, social gesture Eleanor had expected. Your mother was Catherine Voss. I knew her, a little. She was lovely, too gentle for the world she married into. Eleanor went very still. You knew my mother? We corresponded for a time. After she married your father, something shifted in the older woman's face. Not grief, exactly, but the particular weight of a person who has outlived too many people they liked. She wrote about you. She was so proud of you. A pause. I wrote to you. After she died. I don't imagine you received the letters. Eleanor thought of the 4 years of silence, of the small, careful ways the Countess had managed what came in and what went out. No, she said, I didn't. The dowager's eyes went sharp and knowing. No, I didn't think so. She released Eleanor's hands and turned toward the staircase with the brisk energy of a woman who had decided something. Come, I will show you your rooms, and then we will have tea, and you will tell me about yourself, and I will tell you things about this family that my grandson would prefer I kept to myself. Eleanor followed her and felt something fragile and unfamiliar begin to uncurl in her chest. The rooms were extraordinary, not the grandeur of them, though they were grand, but the fact that they were hers. A sitting room with a fire already lit, a bedroom with curtains in deep green that made the space feel like a forest, a writing desk by the window overlooking the gardens, bare now in November but clearly magnificent in their bones. 3 days later, a wardrobe arrived. Eleanor stood in her sitting room and stared at the gowns laid across the chairs and the bed and every available surface, and felt something cold and clarifying move through her. Sapphire, emerald, deep rose, burgundy, colors that had weight and presence and life. His Grace's instruction, the housekeeper said, with the careful neutrality of a woman who had worked for the family long enough to know when not to have an opinion. Eleanor touched the sleeve of the sapphire gown. The silk was extraordinary, the kind of fabric that cost more than she had seen in 4 years of careful, diminished living. She thought of the pale yellows, the washed-out creams, the careful, deliberate choices that had made her blend into wallpaper, that had made her easy to overlook, that had made her small enough to be managed. Someone had chosen those colors for her. She understood that now, with the particular clarity of standing in a room full of jeweled silk, understanding what she had been denied. She dressed for dinner in the sapphire gown and went downstairs with her chin slightly higher than she had managed in 4 years. The Duke was in the hall when she descended. He looked up from a letter he was reading, and something happened in his expression. A brief, unguarded moment before the composure reasserted itself, like a window opened and quickly closed. Miss Voss, he said. Your Grace, she said. I want to thank you for the wardrobe, though I should say, I am not certain I can accept. You can, he said. Consider it a uniform. My grandmother's companion should not be wearing colors chosen to make her disappear. His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. You were never washed out, Miss Voss. Someone simply worked very hard to make you believe you were. She did not have an answer for that. She was not sure one existed. They went into dinner. Over the following weeks, Eleanor discovered that the Duke of Ravenswood was unfailingly courteous, unfailingly attentive to his grandmother's comfort, and almost entirely impossible to read. He appeared at breakfast with the regularity of a man who valued order, disappeared into his study for the middle hours of the day, and reappeared for dinner with the same composed, watchful quality that she had noticed in the Ashworth drawing room. He asked her questions about her reading, her opinions on the estate's management, her thoughts on the political situation in ways that suggested he was actually interested in the answers. He listened when she spoke. He did not speak over her, or past her, or through her. It was, she discovered, profoundly disorienting. She had spent 4 years learning to be unimportant. She did not know what to do with a man who seemed to find her important as a matter of course. The night she found him in the library at 2 a.m, she had gone down for a book and found the fire still burning, and the Duke sitting in the chair nearest the hearth with his cravat loosened, and a glass of brandy untouched on the table beside him, staring at nothing. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Nor could I," he said. He did not seem surprised to see her. He did not seem to find it strange that she was there. He simply gestured to the chair on the other side of the fire, as if this were an ordinary thing. 2 people who could not sleep sharing a fire in the small hours of the morning. She sat. The fire was low and warm. The house was entirely quiet. "Are you afraid?" he asked, after a while, not unkindly, with the directness she had come to expect from him in unguarded moments. "Of what?" she said. "Of this," a pause, "of being seen, of having people look at you and see something worth looking at, after so long of being arranged to be overlooked." She was quiet for a long moment. The fire shifted and settled. "Yes," she said, "terribly." He looked at her. His eyes in the firelight were very dark, and the careful composure he wore during the day had softened into something more unguarded, more human. "I know," he said. "I have spent 32 years being looked at and seen nothing but a title. It is a different kind of invisibility, but I think I understand the shape of it." She had not expected that. She had not expected him to offer something of himself in return, and the unexpectedness of it made something shift in her chest. Some last careful wall she had built against hoping. "Why did you really help me?" she said. "Not the answer you gave in the drawing room, the real one." He was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled softly between them. "Because I was angry," he said. "Because I stood in that hallway and listened to a woman discuss the disposal of another woman's life as if she were furniture. And I was angry, in a way I haven't been in a long time." He paused. "And because I remembered you, from the betrothal celebration 3 years ago. You stood very still and very straight, and you looked like someone who had decided not to want anything, and I thought—" He stopped. "What?" she said. "I thought it was a waste," he said quietly. "And I was right." She did not trust the feeling that moved through her then. She had learned very carefully not to trust feelings that felt like this, warm and sudden and terrifying. She had learned that hope was the cruelest weapon of all. But she was sitting by a fire at 2 a.m. in a house that felt, for the first time in years, like a place where she was allowed to exist. And the man across from her was looking at her, as if she were worth looking at. She did not say anything. Neither did he. But when she finally rose to go back to bed, his hand caught hers briefly as she passed, not holding, just a moment of contact, warm and deliberate, and then released. She did not sleep for the rest of the night. The Ashworth's winter ball was the first public event Eleanor attended on the Duke's arm, and she understood the moment they stepped through the doors that it was not merely a social engagement. It was a declaration. She wore the sapphire gown. Her hair was dressed properly for the first time in 4 years, dark and swept up with small diamonds the dowager had pressed into her hands that afternoon, with the expression of a woman who was enjoying herself immensely. She descended the staircase into the Ashworth ballroom on the Duke of Ravenswood's arm, and every head in the room turned. The whispers began immediately. She felt them more than heard them. The ripple of attention moving through the crowd, the recalibration happening in real time as people who had spent 4 years looking through her were forced to look at her instead. "Don't look at them," the Duke said very quietly, close to her ear. "Look straight ahead." She did. He led her through the room with the calm authority of a man who had never once in his life questioned whether he belonged somewhere. And the crowd parted for him as crowds always did, and Eleanor walked beside him and felt something she had almost forgotten, the sensation of taking up space, of being allowed to be there. The waltz was announced an hour into the evening, and the Duke turned to her with his hand extended, and the particular expression she had come to recognize as his version of a question. Asking without asking, giving her the choice. She took his hand. She had not waltzed in 4 years, but her body remembered. And more than that, his hand at her waist was steady and sure, and he moved with a certainty that made it easy to follow. And then the music swelled, and the room blurred at the edges, and there was only the warmth of his hand and the pressure of his palm against her back. And the way he was looking at her, not past her, not through her, but at her with an intensity that made the rest of the room cease to exist entirely. He pulled her slightly closer than propriety strictly permitted. She did not step back. "You waltz beautifully," he said. "You are distracting me from being terrified," she said. "Is it working?" "Somewhat," she admitted. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. Closer than she had seen from him before. It was Lord Whitmore who found her during the supper interval, while the Duke was occupied with his host. He was handsome in the easy, uncomplicated way of men who had never had to work for anything, golden-haired, charming, with a smile that arrived too quickly and stayed too long. "Miss Voss," he said, falling into step beside her near the terrace doors. "I have been hoping for an introduction. Whitmore. I was a friend of the elder Ashworth brother once upon a time." "I remember," she said carefully. "Then you'll know I have no reason to flatter you." He lowered his voice, conspiratorial and warm. "I only want to say, be careful, with Ravenswood." She looked at him. "I beg your pardon." "He is a strategic man," Whitmore said, with the gentleness of someone delivering difficult news. "Everything he does serves a purpose. The patronage, the positioning, the—" He gestured vaguely in the direction of her sapphire gown, the rescue of inconvenient young women from inconvenient households. "He is not cruel. But you are a piece on his board, Miss Voss, not a player." She felt the words land in her chest like something cold. "You don't know him," she said. "I know his type," Whitmore said pleasantly. "I only want you to ask yourself, what does he gain? There is always an answer. There is always an answer with men like Ravenswood." He smiled and stepped back. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." She stood very still after he left and tried to remember how to breathe. She found the Duke in the card-room 20 minutes later and asked him, with a directness that made the 2 men he was speaking with go slightly wide-eyed, if she might have a word. He excused himself immediately. They found a quiet alcove near the library corridor, and she turned to face him with her hands clasped and her voice very even. "Lord Whitmore tells me I am a piece on your board," she said. "He says you are strategic, that everything you do serves a purpose, that I should ask myself what you gain from this arrangement." She met his eyes. "So I am asking." Something happened in his expression. The composure didn't shatter. It was too practiced for that, but it cracked, visibly, in a way she had only seen once before, by a fire at 2 a.m. "What do I gain?" he repeated very quietly. "Yes." He was silent for a long moment. The sounds of the ball continued distantly. Music, laughter, the clink of glasses. And in the alcove it was very quiet and very close. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing that could be put in a ledger." His voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. "I gain the sight of you at my dinner table, saying something sharp and true that makes my grandmother laugh. I gain the knowledge that you are sleeping in a warm room instead of being shipped to Scotland. I gain—" He stopped. His jaw was tight. "You matter to me already, Miss Voss, and I don't know what to do with that, and I am aware that I have no right to say it, and I am saying it anyway." She stared at him. "You matter to me," he said again, quieter, as if saying it twice made it more true, or perhaps more bearable. "Not as a strategy, not as a piece on a board, as yourself, as the woman who asked me why in a drawing room when no one asks me why, as the woman who sat across from me by a dying fire and told me she was terrified of being seen." Something raw moved through his expression. "I see you. I have been seeing you since the moment you walked into that room, and I cannot stop, and I don't want to." The silence between them was very full. "I don't know how to trust this," she said finally. Her voice was not quite steady. "I've spent 4 years learning not to trust things that feel like this." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust it all at once." He looked at her with the expression she had been trying to name for weeks, and she named it now, finally, standing in a dim alcove while a ball continued without them. It was longing, careful, controlled, immense. "I'm only asking you not to let Whitmore take it from you before it has a chance to be real." She did not answer with words. She stepped toward him instead, and he met her halfway, and when he kissed her it was urgent and careful at once. The kiss of a man who had been restraining something for weeks and was no longer entirely able to, and a woman who was choosing, for the first time in a very long time, to want something and reach for it. When they broke apart, they were both breathing unsteadily. "Whatever comes next," he said, his forehead against hers, "we face it together." "Together," she agreed. What came next arrived on a Thursday morning in the form of the Countess of Ashworth's carriage in the drive. Eleanor watched from the upstairs window as the Countess descended, followed by Lord Ashworth, Eleanor's father, who moved with the defeated shuffle of a man who had long since stopped believing he had any agency in his own life. Behind them, Lord Whitmore, looking considerably less charming in daylight. She went downstairs before anyone sent for her. The confrontation happened in the drawing room, which was appropriate, Eleanor thought. Drawing rooms were where things were decided, about women who were not in the room. She intended to be in this one. "You have no right to her," the Countess said to the Duke, who stood with his hands clasped behind his back and his face entirely still. "She was contracted to this family. She owes this family nothing," the Duke said. His voice was pleasant. It was the most dangerous his voice ever got. She gave 4 years of her life to a household that systematically diminished her, intercepted her correspondence, dressed her to disappear, and was in the process of shipping her to Scotland when I intervened. I would be very careful, Lady Ashworth, about the language of obligation." "Father," Eleanor said. Lord Ashworth looked at her. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been guilty for a very long time and had no idea what to do with it. "Father," she said again, "you let her erase me. You were in that house for 4 years, and you let her make me invisible, and you said nothing." Her voice did not shake. She had decided it would not shake. I am not angry. I am—" She stopped. "I am finished waiting for you to remember that I exist." Her father's face crumpled. It was not satisfying. It was only sad. "Eleanor," he began. "I am not going back," she said. "I am not going to Scotland. I am staying here." She turned to the Duke. "If that is still—" "It is," he said immediately. No hesitation. His eyes on her were steady and certain, and entirely without performance. The Countess drew herself up. "You will be ruined, both of you. I will make certain of it. I will tell every drawing-room in London—" "You will tell them what, precisely?" the Duke said, with a mildness that was somehow more frightening than anger. "That I employed a companion for my grandmother, that I found a young woman of good family being mistreated in your household and removed her from it. I look forward to hearing how that story damages me." He took a single step toward the Countess, and his voice dropped to something very quiet and very final. "And I would encourage you to consider, Lady Ashworth, what I might choose to tell those same drawing-rooms about the letters you intercepted, about the wardrobe, about Scotland." A pause. "I have a very long memory and a great deal of patience. Do not test either." The Countess left. Lord Ashworth followed without looking back. Whitmore had already gone. Eleanor stood in the drawing-room after the door closed and felt the silence settle around her like something she had been waiting for without knowing it. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the trouble I've—" "Don't," the Duke said. He crossed the room to her in 3 strides and took her hands in both of his, and his grip was warm and certain, and she felt it all the way through. "Don't apologize. Not for this. Not to me." She looked up at him. "I tried to think last night about whether I should leave, whether I should go somewhere else, somewhere that wouldn't cost you." "I know," he said, "and I am telling you now, as clearly as I know how. I do not want you to go. I do not want to be protected from you. I have never chosen anything for myself in 32 years. Not this house, not this title, not the life I was handed at birth. I am choosing now. I am choosing you." His voice was rough with the effort of saying it plainly. "If you'll have me." She looked at him for a long moment, at his face, which was open in a way she had never seen it, stripped of the composure, the careful management, the 32 years of practiced distance. He looked frightened, she realized, genuinely, nakedly frightened. She understood that. She was frightened too. "I'd rather be scared with you," she said, "than safe without you." Something broke open in his expression. Not pain, relief. The particular relief of a man who has been holding something very tightly for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. He brought her hands to his lips. The public vindication came, as these things often do, from an unexpected direction. Lady Pemberton, who had been present for the Countess's original drawing-room conversation, and who had a conscience that had been troubling her for weeks, chose a dinner party attended by half of fashionable London to recount, in precise and damning detail, exactly what she had witnessed that morning in the Ashworth drawing-room. The story spread with the velocity that only truly satisfying stories achieve. The Countess of Ashworth found her invitations quietly drying up. Lord Whitmore discovered that his charm had limits, and the Duke of Ravenswood, who had been watching all of this from the position of a man who had made his choice and did not require the world's approval, was nevertheless seen to smile at the news with an expression that his grandmother described as the first genuinely happy smile she had witnessed from him in 15 years. They were married in the chapel at Ravenswood Park on a morning in early spring, when the gardens were just beginning to come back to life, Eleanor walked the aisle alone, because she had chosen to, not from lack of escort, but because she wanted to walk toward him of her own free will, with no one's hand at her back, no one's arrangement propelling her forward, only her own choice. He watched her come toward him with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life, unguarded, shining, slightly undone. His vows were not the formal words. They were his own. "I vow to see you," he said, his voice low and steady in the quiet chapel. "Every day, in every room, I will see you. Not who someone decided you should be, not who it would be convenient for you to be. You." He held her hands as if they were something precious. "I vow to stand beside you, not in front of you, not behind you, beside." Her vows were simpler, because she had always said what she meant. "I vow to let you," she said. "I vow to choose you back, every day." 2 years later, on a December evening while snow fell softly past the library windows, Eleanor sat by the fire with their daughter asleep in her arms, Catherine, named for a woman who had written letters that never arrived, who had been proud of a daughter she had not lived to see become this, and the Duke sat across from her in the chair that had become his chair, the one nearest the hearth, and watched them both with the expression of a man who still could not quite believe his luck. "Tell me again," Eleanor said softly. It had become a ritual between them. This asking, this telling, the story of a drawing room and a cold cup of tea and a decision made in a hallway before he had any reason to make it. "I arrived early," he said, "and I heard a woman discuss the disposal of another woman's life as if she were furniture." His voice was warm and quiet, the voice he kept for this room, for her. "And I was angry, and I remembered a girl with a very straight spine who had decided not to want anything." He looked at her across the fire. "And I thought it was a waste." "And?" she said. "And I was right," he said. "As I am on occasion." She laughed, soft, so as not to wake the baby. Outside, the snow fell on the gardens that were theirs, on the house that was theirs, on the life that they had built from a cold cup of tea and a decision made in a hallway, and the radical, defiant act of choosing each other when no arrangement required it. Catherine slept on, warm and dreaming. The fire burned steadily. Eleanor looked at her husband across the hearth and felt, not the terrified hope of a woman who had learned not to want things, but the settled, certain warmth of a woman who had wanted something and reached for it and found it real. She had been seen. She had been chosen. More than that, she had chosen back. Thank you for staying with Eleanor and the Duke of Ravenswood until the very end. Their story began with a cold cup of tea and a woman being discussed like furniture, and became something neither of them had ever been brave enough to want. If you believe in the kind of love that chooses when no arrangement requires it, this channel has more stories waiting for you. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss one. These stories exist because you stay for them, because you care how they end, and that more than anything is why I keep telling them.